So, Harry, it's been 140 years since Crazy Horse was killed, and we both still get teary-eyed talking about it. Why do you feel so emotional about his death 140 years later?
Well, unfortunately, I get emotional about many things, and talking about the Plains Indian history, I get emotional over Wounded Knee, to think that women and kids were slaughtered wantonly there. I get emotional when I think of how Crazy Horse was totally deceived, and his demise was almost planned. I get emotional when I think about Redcloud tried. Chief Redcloud, who signed the Treaty of 1868, made several trips to Washington. They didn't take those old Indians to Washington to negotiate. They took them to Washington to take them to the military fort close by and show them the power. And so Redcloud came home realizing that the free roaming days of the Indians was over, and it's time to make peace and get the kids educated and whatnot. I get emotional about these things because I put my place in, I often think, what would I have done in those days? And what would I have done if my kids were to have been wantonly shot or killed? And so I get emotional about that. Maybe I shouldn't, but I do. Don't let the tear that might come in my eye deceive you. I can be, and was when I was in the Marine Corps, is probably as vicious as anybody else in a uniform.
That's what I was going to ask you. Do you think the fact that you've actually been on the battlefield is why you feel the pain, or you feel it as deep
could
because you've
be.
been
I
on
don't
the
know.
battlefield?
I was the Japanese were pretty cruel to our troops when they became prisoners, and when I was in combat in the Pacific, in the Marine Corps unit that I was in, we got pretty vicious when we encountered them. I'm not proud of that. I'm not proud of the ones I'm probably killed, but it happened. And when you're in war and you've been trained to, number one, to save your country, stay alive, and you can't do it dead, you do many things that you're not necessarily proud of later. And so I get emotional. I get emotional about not that the American Indian was doomed as far as supremacy of this land the moment the whites set foot on this continent, because the whites were ahead in technology. They had gunpowder, they had modern tools, and they did the one thing that any invader does to gain strength in a country. They capitalize on the division of the tribes. They capitalized on the intertribal warfare between the tribes to weaken the overall mass success of the Indians controlling this country. I get emotional about that. I get emotional about the treaties that were broken. When the Indians came into this area, and there was never a hatred of individual Indians and individual whites. There was a hatred of each other's culture. And it was the government who broke the treaties, who wrote the treaties. They know what they said, and yet they were the quickest to break them. The Black Hills right here. All of this land was supposed to belong forever to the Indians. Once gold was found, that was forgotten. That part was forgotten. And so they connived and literally forced the Indians to give up the Black Hills. They said, if you don't sign these papers giving up the Black Hills, we'll cut your rations off at Redcloud Agency. They were already eating rotten food to start with. the rations they were given weren't sufficient. So I get emotional about those things. I have been here at Crazy Horse now 18 years selling arts and crafts. I've had white men come to my table, talk about how the Indian was abused. I've had white men stand and cry at my table, craft table, for the way the Indians were treated. And so if I get a little emotional when I talk about the abuses to the American Indians, I ask you to overlook that, please.
No, I think it's a good thing. Redcloud. What was Redcloud? Redcloud, sometimes you hear people talk as he was not a traitor, but he gave up too easy. And what is that true, or is that another more myth?
I don't think so. I think when you try to compare Redcloud and Crazy Horse, or Redcloud and Sitting Bull, you're talking about apples and oranges. They're not just alike. Redcloud had counted, it was known to count at least 80 coup on the whites. And what happens when you count a coup? You have to touch them with a stick within touching distance of a short stick. And then you get down to the business of life or death. So Redcloud probably killed at least 80 whites. He was no coward, he was a very brave warrior. But after they took him to Washington a couple of times and took him to this great military fort close to there and showed him the power, Redcloud had enough vision to know, with the whites multiplying like they did, at the time of the Battle of the Little Bighorn, this country already had 40 million people in it. Not Indians, probably most of them whites. Redcloud could see down the road what was happening. And he thought the best thing was to do when he's the only Indian ever to force the U.S. government to a treaty on his terms, not their terms. So he didn't do that being a coward. He didn't do that being a traitor. That's how the Lakota, Dakota, Nakota people had all the land west of the Missouri River, all the rest of the land in South Dakota because of that treaty. He didn't get that because he was a coward. It's just that people, I guess, have to find, or some reason, if they don't like a Redcloud, to I thought Redcloud was a great chief. Sitting Bull was a great chief. Crazy Horse was a great chief. Crazy Horse was a very brave man.